Hi, this is Joni Swedlund. Welcome to the Strong Women, Stronger World podcast, where each episode we interview different leaders to help accelerate your leadership learning, challenge you to take risks to advance your own career, and teach you how to lead from inside out. My comments and insights are based on my own experience, which span a 27-year career in global management consulting, including 18 as a partner. This podcast is meant to inspire and empower you to action. It is time to step into your power. The world needs more women leaders. Together, we are strong. Strong women, stronger world. Our topic today is get along with anyone, anytime, anywhere, with our special guest, Arnold Sanow. We are all in for a special treat today because not only is Arnold one of the nicest, down-to-earth human beings, he always delivers value. So get ready for some great takeaways. Arnold is known as the Get Along Coach and works with leaders and teams to help them get along better with anyone, anytime, anywhere. He is a subject matter expert in communication, emotional intelligence, and interpersonal relationships, and the author of 7 books, including Get Along with Anyone, Anytime, Anywhere. He has delivered over 2,500 professional development programs and was a former adjunct professor at Georgetown University and was recently named by his peers as one of the top 30 global gurus in communication and by Successful Meetings magazine as one of the top 5 best bang for the buck speakers in the USA. Arnold, it's so exciting to have you on the show.
Well, thanks, Joni, for having me. I look forward to it.
Oh, we're going to have some fun today for sure. And Arnold, I think it would be really great for you to give a little bit about your background and the journey on what led you to become the Get Along Coach.
Well, it's interesting, Joni, because background-wise, I have a background in a number of places. My educational experiential is in marketing, organizational development, and counseling psychology as far as my background. And I've always been fascinated by the way people think and the way people are. And it started when I was very young, too. My father was an economist, and he traveled around the world to help build economies in different countries. And even when I was 8 and 9 and 10 years old, I'd go down into the lobbies in the morning of the hotel, and I just start talking to people because I was fascinated what made them tick and what made them think and why they were the way they are. And and what I found is even though people were different all over the world, it was really evident that if you were kind and you were nice and you showed respect to people, you could get along almost with anyone out there. And furthermore, it's interesting. In the last 30 years, I've been doing all my keynotes and presentations. I've worked in every state, all 50 states, and about a dozen countries, working with different things. And through meaningful conversations with everybody, I find that you really can get along with all those people too. And it always hit me back too in college. One thing that when you talk about getting along, I always remember this woman I was dating, and it just hit me home back there. She says, Arnold, it's nice to be great, but it's greater to be nice. And to put that into perspective, somebody said, what's the key to life? What's the key to what is the key to life, the key to happiness? And it always hit me that the key to life is to give it away, to get along with people, to do things for others. And that's where you get the most satisfaction from anything. So to give you a little background, that sort of fits into the bill right there.
Oh, that's excellent. I love that thought. That really kind of goes into it's better to give than to receive, given we're coming into the holiday season as well. But that's really amazing. Well, it's no wonder you started at such a young age, just being so fascinated kind of by human beings and what makes them tick. And so you talk about, as we talk about leadership, Arnold, and, I think about the leadership programs and courses that I've personally been in.
Right.
And a lot of these programs always get across the point that as a leader, one of your goals is not to be liked. However, I'm really curious, what is so important about getting along as a leader?
Well, it's interesting too, when you say not to be liked, there are points on that one because I disagree to a point, but then other points. For example, if you're a military leader and you're attacking a hill, you don't care if you're liked. You just go up that hill and you don't have to do any of this nice stuff. Just do it. But when you talk about leadership today, I like to say leadership today, it's the soft skills, those touchy-feely things that a lot of people don't like, are really give you the hard results that you want. And just to put this in a perspective a little bit too, I don't know if you ever saw that show, So You Think You Can Dance. And by the way, this is where I get all my information. People use the Harvard Business Review. I always watch these TV things. But there was a guy named Nigel Lytho, who's a judge on there. And he said this, it would sort of hit home. It's not necessarily the best dancers who win. It's the ones they like the most when you really put it into perspective. Teddy Roosevelt said the single most important ingredient in the formula of success is getting along and connecting with others. And I like to take this a step further when you talk about getting along. Everything being equal, people deal with what? They deal with people they like and they trust. And we all know that. But everything being unequal, they still deal with people they like and they trust. For example, when you look at hiring decisions, and I've had a lot of opportunities because I do coaching with leaders and stuff, and one of the things is I help them look at the hiring process. And I know you've done this too, obviously, where you've come from. And, and you could probably, back me on this one, but when you're looking to hire somebody, what's going through people's heads? The first thing they're thinking, okay, do I want to work with this person for the next 5 years or so? They can have all the technical skills, all this, but you ever, and I think, Joni, you've probably gone through this too. You see somebody, okay, they look great on paper, but there's just something I don't like about them. And I don't know how you write that down there, but you just don't like them in that case. And it's interesting too, in some of my sessions I do, I always ask people, how many of you ever had two bosses? And one was, really great. He did everything. He was likable. He did this. And the other one was just a pain in the neck. And you know what? You're going to do your job because you want to do your job. You want to do a good job. But who are you going to do the extras for? Who are you going to stay after for? Who are you going to volunteer to do the work for? And it always turns out to be the one that's the most likable. And you know this as well as I do too, that the number one reason that people leave and, in after action studies is because of their manager. And it's not because they love them. I mean, it's not, they're not leaving them because they love them. It's because there's something, they're either a bully, they're arrogant, they're condescending. We can go into all these different things that they do. And so it really does do that. And unfortunately, what happens is the people become leaders because they see the other leaders above them. So if their leader's not likable, they say, well, maybe that's the way I should do it. But that's not the way that's going to get the results that you want.
What you're saying, Arnold, resonates so much because I think we do tend to gravitate towards people that we like. And these are people that are easy to get along with. And I think back to my early years of my career, and I think I had my best and worst boss as my first two examples. Right. Maybe I needed to learn early on, right? And the first was the best boss in the world, someone who, really stretched me and, was likable, was motivating. And it was just, I would have gone to the ends of the earth for this individual. And then, compare and contrast that with my next boss who, basically said, I'm sending you to this country because your life is less valuable than mine. Right. I'm not kidding. Yeah. This boss actually said that to me because I didn't have kids at the time and he did. Wow. And, that really made an impression. So I think that there's a lot of truth to what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting too, because, one of the questions you ask is, why is it important, to really get along on these things too? And it's interesting just what you said there, and I'll just make this point because I think people need to understand what's going on. When you said your boss, didn't want to go because he had kids and you didn't. A lot of times people don't understand. For example, my wife at one time was working, and when she had a little child, we had a little child, and what happened was, the boss, who was another woman, she said, well, you got to keep working because she never had children. But as soon as she had children, then she had a whole different perspective on it too. So it's where you're coming from. But when you talk about why is it important to get along, I don't know if you ever read the book Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman, but in there he says, we are judged by a new yardstick, not only how smart we are by our training and expertise, but also how we handle ourselves and each other. And, in working with companies and organizations, like I said, over the last 30 years, I find that 90% of the problems in any organization are communication breakdowns.
Yes.
And it could be misunderstanding, mistrust, misinformation, miscommunication. And going a step further, according to a study by Harvard and Stanford University, only 15% of your success in your job in relation to getting things done and to being more productive in creating a positive environment will be due to your technical or your academic skills. And the other 85% will depend on your communication, your emotional intelligence, and your basically your ability to get along. And furthermore, in this challenging and uncertain environment that we have right now, everybody is doing more with less, and as fast. The niceties are getting lost. For example, and relationships suffer. Let's say for example, Joni, you're my boss, and I'm walking down the hall, and I say, "Good morning, Joni," and you say nothing. So if you're my boss, what am I starting to think? I perceive it. I jump to conclusion, because what do? We make snap judgments. Yes. We make conclusions, and oh God, that's a slight. She doesn't like me. Am I going to get fired? You know how we start writing the script that goes with that. And there's nothing wrong with Joni. She just might be, Joni, you, and there's nothing wrong with you, but it might be that you're just thinking of other things and you're not aware of that. And so what happens is the other person walks away. So part of this, when you talk about emotional intelligence, be super aware of what's going on in that area. And, it's interesting too, when we talk about getting along, according to the University of North Carolina, the average person loses about 7 weeks of productivity because of unresolved communication and personality issues. So again, just going into this, people join companies and they leave managers, and it's because the managers are missing that emotional intelligence. They're missing the ability to get along. They're not likable, and they're maybe just not self-aware. It's just an example that I gave you right there.
Absolutely, Arnold. I think, you're making some exceptional points, and, what you're describing around the softer skills, for those harder results, that aligns really well with some of the studies that are coming out recently from the World Economic Forum as well. They're saying that the softer skills are going to be more important moving forward than technical skills. So that's, I think, a really important thing for people to take away. The other thing that you mentioned that I think is so important for leaders to understand is that just when you talked about, walking by your boss and they didn't say hello, or maybe something now in the virtual world where we start to make up these assumptions and stories that we tell ourselves. If those go left untested, that really is going to hold us back from our true potential as leaders, because all of a sudden we're going to have these limiting beliefs, and we're going to start believing these stories, whether they're true or not. And, that will hold us back from seeing different options and choices as leaders.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
I know that in your book, Arnold, you talk about the importance of body language and getting along. So as women leaders, I'm really curious, because you do talk a little bit about how softening our image can be helpful. Does that apply to women as well?
Yes, it does. And I would say a couple things here. First of all, men don't share as many facial expressions as women. I just had a session the other day up in Ohio, and there was a couple guys, and I'm not going to mention the company because I'll get in trouble, but a couple guys and a lot of women. And the women just were more, effervescent. They were more outgoing. And anytime you said something funny, and I don't mean to attack men here, but the men would look at each other, okay, should we laugh or not? Should we laugh or not? And the women were like, we're going, hey, yes, and they were going crazy. And then they'd question you, and they do stuff. And so women, when we talk about the body language, are a little more effervescent in this. And then women are also more in tune to other people's body language than men. They'll pick up on what somebody's really saying. So it does have an effect. But let me give you some general, I always like to give people like a little acronym I use to help you soften your image, to make you more approachable, likable, and trustworthy. And so the first thing when I talk about to soften your image, it's SOFTEN. The S is smile. And when I say smile, let me just say something here. If you normally don't smile, don't start doing it all of a sudden, because people will wonder what you're up to. So don't go into your office and say, why is she smiling all the time? So, they don't get it. And also smile only when appropriate too. You don't want to smile like if you have bad news. And I saw this on the news a while ago. This was a couple years ago, but there was a broadcaster who said there were 5 deaths in Fallujah. He had this weird smile on his thing. And it didn't mean he was thinking it was funny, but nervousness sometimes, because I do a lot of presentation skills training, and you see people get nervous on this stuff. So make sure you smile. And by the way, when you're on the phone, if you smile, it does come through on the phone. So make sure you have that. And one of my clients was a big, again, I won't mention the name of the client, but we put mirrors on everybody's desk. And before they got on the phone, it wrote ring, 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 ring. Good morning. How are you? And they had to smile, and they had 64% less complaints that year because of that stuff. And people said, oh, they're so nice and they're so pleasant because the smile does go through. So the first thing is smile. The second thing to make yourself more approachable, likable, and trustworthy is the O, and that's openness. And whether you're doing a virtual meeting or whether you're in person, open your arms. I'm amazed that people sometimes do this because it's sort of a standoffish thing. I know, like professional photographers, they will put your hands together. Well, this is a standoffish thing. And I'm so conscious the way people perceive you immediately. I don't care how cold I am. I either have my hands in a gesture or by my side. So stay open. Third thing is, I call it forward. The F is forward lean or focus. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is pay attention to the person you're dealing with. Now, in the real world, have you ever, for example, Joni, you ever gone to a party and, people are looking around, they all, maybe there's somebody better over there. I don't know.
I hate that.
Yeah. Maybe they're more important. And, and it's like, and it's interesting. I had the opportunity, and I don't want to get into politics here, but I had the opportunity one time to, meet with President Clinton because he was on the same schedule at a meeting I was talking at too. But he came in early, and it was interesting. He would walk into a room, and the first people he talked to were the waiters and the waitresses. He didn't necessarily just talk to the cool kids. And you know how sometimes we're just, oh, there's somebody who's really important, I should talk to them, and we ignore everybody else. It's like people, a lot of companies, when they're looking to hire people, what do? They take them to lunch, and you know what they look for? They look to see how they treat the waiter. Because I'm going to be real nice to you, Joni, because you're hiring me. But then they dismiss the waiter, and that's how they're going to treat the other part of the staff. So focus and pay attention to the person you're dealing with. The T is territory, so to make yourself, and that means don't get too close. And virtually this doesn't matter, but when you're in person, do you ever have somebody when you're talking to them, they're right in your face, and you step backwards, and they just keep going and going.
No sense of the personal space.
Space, and all you want to do is get out of there. I mean, it's just bad breath coming all over, so you just want to get out of this place. But in American culture, the ideal distance would be about 14 inches to 4 feet away. And by the way, I'm describing everything in American culture because I know you've worked overseas, and it's totally different there.
Exactly. In today's standards, it's at least 6 feet plus, right?
Yeah, that's right. You took it. 6 feet in today's standard, but when the virus is gone, make sure you don't, you can get closer. The next thing is the E. So we have SOFT. The E is eye contact. And by the way, when I say eye contact, there's a fine line between staring and stalking. So you ever see somebody who's looking at you and they just, I don't know. I do this in some of my presentations. Just actually, the other day, somebody was just looking at me in a live presentation, and I just kept. I didn't want to look at him because I said, "Well, what's wrong? Is like my zipper down or what? Why are you staring at me?" And in American culture, the ideal distance the ideal time to keep your eyes on him is about 3 to 5 seconds. But don't start doing this. Don't start going like, okay, I got to get off now. Just finish the point with that person and leave it. Now, virtually, what the ideal thing is to look at the camera. Obviously, though, it's hard to do because I want to look at you, and so it shifts a little bit. But you keep your eyes on the camera to make that happen. So eye contact is there, but 3 to 5 seconds is the key. And then the last thing, the N is nod, and that means don't nod off. I know I've seen people get up to speak and they're yawning while they're talking to you. It's like they're bored with themselves, which is not a good thing. So nod to show that you're paying attention to people. And then when you're on the phone, by the way, watch out how you nod there too. For example, I know somebody when I was talking to them, they go, which literally means what? I got better things to do than talk to you. They're just they're rushing you. And when I feel like you're rushed, it takes away from the connection and the likability. So you need to watch out for that stuff too. And by the way, men and women communicate different on the nodding too. So for example, if a woman is nodding, does that mean she's agreeing with you?
It means she's listening, actually.
She's listening. Yeah,
Yeah.
she's listening to you. And I see men get so messed up on this because there'll be a guy giving us talk, and all the women in the the company are all nodding, and he thinks, oh, they just bought everything I said, and the women are walking away thinking that was the biggest jerk I ever met. So they just miss the whole point. So men and women do communicate differently in that area. But here's the point: if you don't do these things, you're not as approachable. For example, if you're in my face, or you're not looking at me, you're not as approachable. And then the other thing, people will focus on you and not the message you want to get across. So if you're just right in my space, I'm not listening to a word you're saying. So little things like that happen. So smile, SOFTEN, and I would recommend you just follow that from an ongoing basis.
Those are some great, just simple, pragmatic tips that also work within this pandemic environment.
Right.
So I think that's terrific. And then aside from the body language, Arnold, I know you also talk about words and language that can really impact how we get along. So are there any words that we should be avoiding in order to make sure we're getting along with others?
Yes, and if you have some others you want to add, feel free, because I'm just going to give you a short list here because of the time we have. But here's some of the ones that come up. And first of all, let me say this: words do hurt. Body language and tone has a big effect, but words do hurt. There's an old saying: "Sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never." And they can. And I always say to people, be sure to taste your words before you spit them out. Too many times we just jump in and say something, and it just ruins relationships. And so let me give you a few words here. According to the USA Today, they did a study, and they said 47% of Americans hated this word more than ever. And it's also, some other studies said this, but the word was whatever. So, for example, if you tell me something and you say, and I say whatever, I'm just doing what? I'm just dismissing you, and you don't mean anything. So stay away from whatever. Another word to watch out for is the word no problem. So, for example, if you ever go to Ritz-Carlton, for example, if you look at some of the training of some of these hotels around there, they actually get people in trouble if you say no problem, because people born before 1980, when they think of the word no problem, they're thinking, well, was there a problem? Whereas people born after that, it really is no problem. They don't really care. But a lot of places I work with now, they have that in their training requirements, that you never say that word. So if I go to the hotel, let's say a hotel at Ritz-Carlton, I say thank you to the desk receptionist, and they say no problem, I'm thinking, well, was there a problem? Versus if what did they say? They basically say it's my pleasure.
My pleasure.
My pleasure, or something, or thank you, or whatever. But just remember that even though a lot of people younger, it's no big deal, but a lot of people older, just you don't want to say it at all. Some other words just to keep in mind here: it is what it is. So let's say you go to work. You ever been in a team meeting and somebody says, well, it is what it is. Okay, well, just skip it. Doesn't really matter anymore. So stay away from that. I always love it when somebody says, Joni, it's not personal. Yeah, right. I want to tell you this, but it's not personal. It's not personal. Yeah, it's personal.
It's business.
It's business. The other thing I would mention is the word and versus but. So I say, hey, Joni, you did a good job, but...
Oh, yeah.
What does that do? It dismisses everything that was prior to that. So, Joni, you did a great job. And here's a few other things, you might want to try to get better. I'd also watch out for labels in the workplace. Leaders just really got to watch out. So, and I don't mean to use your name all the time, but you're right here in front of me. I'll say, so, if I say Joni, that's very unprofessional. Or Joni, you have a bad attitude. That really doesn't mean anything. So if I say, Joni, you have a bad attitude, I'm going to say, Joni, bad attitude because of this. You got to give specifics that go along with it. Accuse people, really watch out for that. So I said, you did this, or you, as soon as you say you to me, I'm going to get defensive. And so watch out for you. Here's a big one too. I always ask people in my sessions, I say, how many of you are sarcastic? And usually I get like 80% raising their hands. But the next thing I ask them is, how many of you ever been sarcastic to somebody who did not get it? And then, you know what? And then they hate you forever. They just walk away. And I've seen people not talk to each other for years just because of that aspect. So make sure if you're going to be sarcastic, make sure you have somebody who really knows where you're going with that. Also watch out for big words. We want to impress people. For example, I was talking to my wife the other day and she kept going along and she kept saying, "That's very pugilistic. It's very pugilistic. It's very pugilistic." And after about 20 minutes, and when she kept saying that word, I kept focusing on what's pugilistic. So I didn't hear another word she said. And after about 20 minutes, I said, "I haven't heard one word you've said," which is not a good thing to say to your wife. But anyway, and she says, "Well, why haven't you heard what I said?" And I said, "Well, what the heck does pugilistic mean?" She says, "Well, it means warlike." I said, "Just say warlike." So keep it at a lower level, because else people, once I don't understand something or you don't understand, what do? You're just going to tune me out. So we forget there. And then the other thing I would say too is, obvious things, watch out for slang and profanity. Although I hate to say this, there's been some studies coming out of England that says people who use a lot of profanity are actually smarter than the rest of us. So I'm not.
What?
I
have not heard that one.
I'm not. I hate that when they can try to go against everything I'm trying to talk about. And they said in some places it connects people too, like when they're profane with each other. But stay away from that, because it's just going to take it for what it is. And then the other thing I would say is the 3 things to avoid, especially these days too, is like sex, politics, and religion. Just when I say avoid it, just be very careful. Know who you're talking to when you do that, because people will discount you immediately. So, and they get fights, and then nobody will listen to you or buy anything or work with you. And so just stay, and don't assume everybody agrees with you. That's what I always tell people. So be very careful. But those are some words and language, and and I don't know if you have any others, but there's a list. We could go on forever, but due to time, these are the ones that come up all the time in the sessions that I do. So I wanted to make sure.
I think it's great. I think, again, these are some very pragmatic tips, I think, for everybody, especially, I think, I know that some of the phrases you mentioned earlier, I've certainly used before, and I didn't realize there was a generational impact to that, especially no problem. I mean, that's a one that's very common. So I think this is really good to bring that awareness. Some of them I think are pretty straightforward. Obviously, we want to avoid the profanity, the slangs, the buts. Yes, I think that learning you can really co-create as a leader, I believe, from others by using the word "and," replacing the but with the "and." So acknowledge them with their idea and offer and build upon that. And I think, to your point, that really does help to bring that get along aspect in helping to connect with others.
Exactly.
Okay, so you also had mentioned in your book it's important how you say things. So one of the things that as leaders, it's important to learn how to strategically say no. How do you do that? Like, what are the tones? Can you give us some examples of how you can do that effectively?
Well, when you say no, a lot of times people avoid. First of all, if you avoid a conflict, it just gets worse. And I've seen so many leaders do this. They put it off, they put it off, they put it off, and eventually it explodes, and nobody gets anywhere. And so you need to actually but a lot of us are afraid to say it, because if we say it the wrong way, then people get madder. So for example, how do you say no in a nice way? So let's say, if I could use your Joni again here, if you can use you as an example, let's say you're interrupting me at work. Okay. And I could say 2 things. I said, "Joni, I'm busy right now." Or I could give you that look. And what happens when I do that, I'm cutting into the relationship. I'm cutting into the connection. You may not even want to you may not even come to me anymore because you're afraid of how I'm going to react. So I might say something like this, and I call it the USA technique. And I say, "Joni, I understand this is important to you. And what I'm saying by understand is I'm empathizing with you. I'm making you feel like aware that you're important. So I understand this is important to you, Joni. So, and then the S is, however, here's the situation. I've got this report that's due out at 4:15. And here's the point behind the S, saying here's the situation, is when managers give reason or leaders give reason, they get a lot more compliance than when they don't. So I understand this is important. However, here's the situation. And then you got to give a reason. If you don't give a reason, you don't get as much compliance. And so let's do this, Joni. And I call it action or alternative. Why don't we meet tomorrow at 4:15? Why don't we do this? Why don't you get lost? No, I wouldn't say that, but I mean, you can do those types of things. And by the way, you can use this USA in meetings. Somebody's talking too much in a meeting. Like, for example, Joni, I understand you want to go into this right now, but here's the situation. We've got lunch in about 5 minutes. Why don't I do this? I can talk to you after the meeting. So it's a nice way of breaking into something. And you can use this in a difficult conversation too. You have to tell somebody who has bad behavior. So, I understand you're doing this. However, here's the situation where, while we have these meetings, we need to be respectful and I'm making this up at this point. Why don't we do this? I can, we have some coaching programs, or we have this, or there's a new session coming, and you got to watch how you say that. But I use that USA thing because a lot of times people are afraid of how it's coming out. So you've really got to be aware of that. And for example, if you have somebody who you want to tell something to, so let's say, never say the word feedback either. Here's another word I would stay away from. Joni, I have some feedback from you. That scares people. Feedback. Oh my gosh. I might say, Joni, would you mind if I made a couple of observations? Doesn't that sound a lot nicer on that?
A great way to tee it
up. Yeah, because boy, feedback, I've used that and I scare myself because I know what people are thinking. And so again, and I'll go into one more thing too. If somebody made a derogatory comment to you, as the punishment fits the crime, don't jump on them. For example, I had one of my clients who I was coaching. Her boss kept calling her honey all the time. She called him honey this, and she was in a vice president of this company, and she called him honey, and he called him honey, and she called him honey. And she says, Arnold, I'm just not going to take this anymore. I'm just going to tell him what I think. And I said, okay, you can do that. But what's going to happen if you start doing that? It's going to derail all connections, derail the relationships. We're not going to get along forever. So what we did is here's how we approached it. She went to him and says, Jim, I know you don't mean anything derogatory by this. That's sort of a nice way. However, I feel uncomfortable, and use that word, I feel uncomfortable when she said, when I'm called honey. And, as soon as she said that, and he said, would you mind calling me? She said, would you mind calling me Paula? And he says, you know what he said right after that? Oh, he said, I didn't know that bothered you. And it was over, versus filing a grievance right off the bat.
Yes.
Now, let's say he did it again. He said, Jim, I know we've talked about this before. I think we need to have a meeting with our boss. So that's this next step. And then again, if he does it one more time, he said, Jim, we've talked about this before. We've talked with my boss. And, right now I'm going to the EEO, the FBI, the CIA, but I like to tell people how, because I get involved with people a lot of times I work with people with behavioral issues sometimes. And one of the things that comes up is how to say things in a nice way, because I've seen so many I've been to one organization. We had a retreat one time, and nobody got along at all. And when we went to breakfast, they all sat at different tables. And I thought this was going to be a 2-day retreat. I said, oh, I should ask for triple the pay on this one. I said, I'm paid too little to do this. But it's because the way they talk to each other, Yeah. Anyway, I'll move it with that.
Wow. There's so much there. I love the advice, run towards your problems, because you've given us some very pragmatic tips on how to address some pretty sticky issues, particularly for women in the workplace. And the sooner we can address those things and do it in such a beautiful way, one of the ways I know that I had approaching feedback, for example, people they go into shutdown mode the minute you say feedback. But when I've also couched it in the way of, look, I'm a big believer in learning moments, and I have an observation I'd love to share with you, or, are you open to that? Mm-hmm. And absolutely, that really puts people, I think, at ease and in a more receptive place to receive the information. And as you were talking about how putting the actions of what has happened and talking about your feelings, how that particular act left an impression on you and how that made you feel, that really helps to get it across to an individual in a very human kind of way.
Mm-hmm. And if I could say one more thing, I remember there was one time, and this happened between you and I. There was one time I think I had to postpone a meeting or something, and I called you up later because I said you did this really the right way, because you said you came back and you said, I felt and you even used I feel concerned that when you changed our meeting, and it was and then I thought that was done really well, so I'm giving you credit on that one.
Oh, thank you, Arnold.
Yeah.
I'm holding you accountable.
But I mean, it was a way to do it when you have because when you have a concern with somebody, because obviously, even though I work with you and you work with me, there's going to be times when there's some kind of, but you don't want it to go out of control. Whereas like people just assuming one thing, the other, because you don't know what's going on there.
100%.
And you need to bring it up, and because else somebody's going to go off on a statement. Let's say I did that and you didn't say anything, there'd be this feeling, and you're saying, okay, why is he doing this, and why is he missing this, and why, you come up, and I don't mean you, but you may come up with your own script. And so
absolutely, we tell ourselves these stories all the time, and what may have just been what many times boils down to miscommunications or a misinterpretation. If we don't communicate and address those as leaders up front, and as you mentioned, run towards those problems, then it can, what started out as an anthill becomes a mountain, right?
Yeah.
And it's much easier to deal with the anthill than it is with the big mountain of a problem. So I think that's really good advice, Arnold.
And just to make one point on that, there's a Bill Cates, who's a speaker. He basically says, make sure, he says, get out of wimped junction, WIMP, wimp junction. Whereas you say, okay, should I do it? Should I not? Just do it,
Yes.
And one of my key words I keep focusing on is just do it. Just do it. I buy those shirts, those Nike shirts, just do it. Just because if you put it off, it just it gets worse. So
100%. All right. So one thing that I definitely want to make sure that we touch on while we have you is, in your book, you talk about there are 6 things that we can do to have people sing our praises. And I'm certain that a lot of people would like to know what those 6 things are. So please enlighten us.
Okay, well, let me give you the 6 things, and I'll go through these pretty quickly. But the first one is attitude, and and I don't mean to be touchy feely about this, but everything does begin and end with attitude when you really boil it down to it. And for example, Hyatt hotels, they used to do this. And I don't know if they still do it, but if you went to an interview and you didn't smile at least 5 times in a 5-minute interview, guess what happens? Your odds of getting a job there, you would just not even start. Like Disney World had a thing where they actually have people go around and be sort of mood police. And when they see people and the staff not feeling good, not being totally happy or having a great attitude that day, they don't fire them, but they take them off for a while, because what happens? The attitude comes out and people perceive that in things. And when we talk about attitude too, it's really how we look at things. There's an old saying, it's not the situation that happens in our lives, but it's how we react to them. And it always reminds me of some stories about good attitudes. And there was a guy said, somebody asked the guy, I'm sorry to see you're divorced. And he says, I wasn't divorced, I was traded, which is another way of looking. So you look at this, or the kid who's in the bottom half of his class, somebody says, I'm sorry to see you're in the bottom half of the class. He says, well, without me, there wouldn't be a top half. So it's just all how you look at these things in this. And on a more serious note, what's that saying that somebody says, I was upset that I had no shoes, until I saw someone who had no feet. So it's all putting into perspective.
Great perspective.
And so I ask yourself, so here's a couple things on attitude to keep it in conjunction. And a number of years ago, this was like 15 years ago, I did some work with National and Dulles airports, and we were trying to do a whole customer service reinvention there. And one of the things we did was we gave everybody, we called it the flip side exercise. Everybody at National, from the managers to the people driving the buses, we gave them a little black book. And when somebody did something wrong, they had to write the flip side. And I do this with a lot of my clients too. So to keep your attitude. So let's say you hated your job. Well, if you hate your job, what's the flip side? Well, at least I got a job, so you should be good. You should feel great about that. Or let's say you put a dent in your car. Well, at least I've got a car. Let's say you're stuck in traffic. Well, at least I'm not the person stuck. Let's say your husband or wife or boyfriend or girlfriend leaves you. well, I won't get into that one, but there's a flip. And
There's
people
always a flip side, a silver lining.
More closet space. What do you want? So, you could go on. But, to put this into perspective a little bit, a long time ago, I don't know if you remember Christopher Reeves, who used to be Superman.
Yeah.
And I was also speaking at a seminar he was doing, and he was right before me. And it was sort of interesting because he was sitting up there. He was paralyzed, but he would look at the audience and, he was talking about attitude, and he would just move his head and he said, I would change places with any one of you for any of your so-called problems. Do you want to take me up on it? And it was like, okay,
Wow.
my attitude just changed. Right. But I would recommend you do the flip side exercise to keep that in good shape on that point. So the other thing too is when we talk about that is count your blessings. When I say that, and I always ask myself this, and I'm sure, I think you do this too, but when something's going wrong and everything's going down the tubes, I always say, what am I grateful for at this moment? And I would really recommend that, because when, let's say, oh geez, this is that. Well, you know what? I'm alive. I have hands. I can see. I can be here. I can talk to you. It's all in there, and it's just, what am I grateful for at this moment?
And do you know, Arnold, that gratitude is actually one of the biggest predictors of resilience for leaders. So I think that that's a really important skill for leaders to focus on, just building more gratitude in their lives.
Yeah, and I know that's a proponent, because you talk a lot about resilience, and I know that's a part of your talk right there. So, but what am I grateful for right now? And then the other thing on attitude too that I would probably just say is one thing, and let me give you a lot of times our attitude slips because of physiological reasons. And what I mean by that, let me give you another little acronym. I like acronyms because it's the only thing I can remember, but I call this the HALT, H-A-L-T. And so, for example, our attitude slips a lot of times because we're hungry. So let's say I have a meeting coming up at work and I'm starving. And you say something is, okay, what do you mean? You know how we get terse and we get tense because of what? We're hungry. So let's eat before we have those meetings. The other thing is they're angry. And what I mean by angry is, you ever come into work angry, or you're angry at somebody else? And so what happens is that demeanor starts coming over to the people you're talking to and other people there. So angry. The L is lonely. People want to belong. They want to connect. And I don't care if you're an extrovert or introvert, people want to be part of the team. So I'm really I always make sure I try to include everybody into everything. And then the last thing is tired. The T is tired. I used to do these flights because I used to work with Lexus and Toyota out in California, their headquarters. And I do these all-night flights back to Washington, D.C. And when I did those flights, I would not talk to anybody the next day, because I don't know about you, but you ever been tired and somebody gets on the phone and say, okay, Joni, that's enough. Okay, I've heard that before. And you'd see yourself, you shouldn't do that, but you do it. So I lose more customers by talking to them than not talking to them. So just be careful on that. So the first thing is attitude. And so just keep that on there. And the key things is do the flip side exercise. And I would say, what am I grateful for right now? And that would be the key things in attitude. Second thing is to show appreciation. Number 2 is appreciation. And and by the way, when you show appreciation to somebody, you feel good too, because the oxytocin, that hormone, comes into play. But also, people love you when you show appreciation to them. I mean, if I tell Joni, I really liked what you did, you're in heaven for the next week. You just love it, and people love you. Southwest Airlines, their philosophy is you need to say 5 positive things for every negative thing. And that's not in a row. You don't say you're great, you did this, now you suck. But you keep it in a row on that stuff too. And what I recommend to people who I work with who do not show appreciation enough, so people I coach, is I say, for the next 21 days in a row, I just want you to write down every day, just say something nice to somebody, even if it's a thank you. And you know what happens after 21 days? You start becoming a habit. And by the way, when you show appreciation, it has to be genuine and it has to be authentic. I can't say, hey, Joni, you did a great job. You did, when she didn't. You have to do it. And the appreciation should not just be, Joni, I like your hair, or like shoes. I mean, it's one thing, but it should be, Joni, I appreciate that you came in early today to help me out. But really show that appreciation and really help it out. I used to have a boss one time who used to do this, and I'll just write it down. But I used to be the marketing director of the Marine Corps a number of years ago, and I worked for this general. And if I'd come in with a proposal, I'd come in with some work, and he'd write on the letter, I don't know if you can see that, it said DWD. And so he'd say, here's the project, General. And he'd write DW. You know what that meant? Darn well done. So he would give me this DWD on my paper, and I'd go around to all my other coworkers and say, look at this, Joni, I got a DWD. Look at this, I got a, and then people say, I don't care, you got a DWD. But anyway, they do feel good. So that's the second thing, show appreciation. Third thing is be reliable and responsive. I'm going to put those in the 2 areas, and do what you say you're going to do it when you say you're going to do it right the first time, get it done on time. And it's always remembered, I did something in Hawaii one time for a garbage company, and they had on the side of their truck talking about, being reliable. It says, I had to write this, we guarantee complete satisfaction or double your garbage back. How do you like that? Yeah, so there you go. But be reliable and responsive. Next thing is be credible. And what I mean by credible is, do you display and do your staff display trust? And this is probably the biggest thing there. It takes years to build. What do they say? It takes years to build and what, seconds?
Seconds to go away. Mm-hmm.
And so when we talk about trust, it's a key thing. And, there's all sorts of things we can talk about, but there's a number of issues on how to make that work. But you need to display that yourself, because you are the role model. Are you mirroring the behaviors as a leader that you want others to do? And it's interesting. I've worked with the FBI and some police departments, and it's interesting what they always say. They say, if you do something wrong, let us know, but never, ever lie about something. You're going to get in trouble for lying, but not for making a mistake, because we all make mistakes on things. And the next couple last things there is appearance. Another thing, when I say appearance, don't judge a book by its cover, but what does everybody do? They judge a book by its cover. And whether you're online or in person, know your audience, know what you're going through. One time I worked with a big software company, and I came in and I was about to do the session, and the person who hired me, because I was in a suit and tie, she pulled me inside and she says, you can't go in looking like that. And I said, what do you mean? Look at your audience. And they're all in shorts and T-shirts and jeans and cutoffs. And I'm thinking, oh, shoot. And then I was about to put a hole in my suit. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. But it gives an impression one way or the other. And we've all heard that thing, perception is reality, which is not really, but that's really not true. But here's the real truth to that. My perception is your reality. And people make up their mind about you, take a guess, in milliseconds. So you've really got to watch how you're coming through. And then the last thing on that is empathy. And this is a big one. If you look in top leaders, who was the CEO of Bain Capital? He was rated as one of the top leaders in the country last year. And the staff gave him like 100%. And his number one quality was what? Was empathy. And when we talk about empathy, and I'll just make this one statement about empathy. We've all heard the saying, walk a mile in my shoes. Well, I'm going to take it a step further. Before you walk a mile in my shoes, you need to take off yours first. And I'll go a step further than that. You need to get in the skin of that other person. And I don't mean to be political here, but remember when the National Football League players were kneeling? Some of them were kneeling there. What did people do? They made snap judgments. They said, oh, that's good, or that's bad. They made quick judgments. But what I would take, if you're really smart on this, you're going to say, okay, if I was going to I don't understand, I would say, why are they doing that in the first place? You need to take a deeper look before you make your judgment on those things. So that's what I would take a look when we talk about, empathy. And there's a lot more on empathy, but right now, just because of our broadcast, I'm going to leave it there. But those are the things to keep in mind to get everybody singing your praises that you need to follow on a regular basis. And by the way, when I talk about some of these things, empathy, I just spent like an hour and a half with a group the other day just speaking just about that. So you can go into all these things a little bit, but I wanted to give you little things to remember. But just remember that before you walk a mile in my shoes, you need to take off yours first.
I think these are all really pragmatic and good reminders for all of us. We all bring our own filters into life and experience the same situation, sometimes differently based on our backgrounds and experiences. And I think your point of really getting to the why something may be happening and kind of looking behind that. And, it also all of these remind me of going back to that saying, do unto others as you would want others to do unto yourself. So I think these are all really great tips, Arnold. And then before I let you go, I have a keystone question that every guest is going to answer. And that is, what makes you feel strong? And I'm going to give you just a minute to think about it, Arnold. So, given that this is our first episode, I'm going to share what makes me feel strong in my leadership. I believe what makes me feel strong is when I focus on where I want to go and keep the faith. That makes me feel strong and confident in my leadership. And I remember it wasn't too long ago. In fact, it was last fall. I was at a leadership program where I found myself, in a situation where I had never really done the high wires before.
Okay, yeah.
So, where you have to climb up like this, 30 to 40 foot platform, this ladder. And everybody had been able to do the activity with a partner.
Mhm.
And when it was my turn, my partner was not physically capable to do the climb. And so the instructor said, well, Joni, you're going up by yourself. And so I thought, why not? I'll give it a try. So I went up on this platform, and I remember that I had to step out onto this high wire. And there was, I knew that there was someone holding me up with the ropes, but you forget about that person, right? And, there's this dangling rope and it is out of reach. And so I turned back to the platform and I'm literally trying to get to the tippy tip of the screw and kind of scoot a little bit out on the high wire. And then I'm still far away. And then all of a sudden, the person who was holding my ropes, making sure that I wasn't going to fall, his name was Todd. And I just heard him say, look where you want to go. And all of a sudden it shifted my whole perspective. And I looked at that dangling rope. And at that point, I let go of the past and the platform and took a enormous step of faith. And I grabbed that dangling rope. From that moment, in my body, I felt that strength and that confidence. And I hold on to that now because that makes me really feel strong in my leadership.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yeah, and to answer your question there too, what makes me feel strong is I always look at a couple words here: humility, and the understanding that I don't really know it all. I mean, there's so many people that can teach me stuff. You got to keep learning all the time, and I don't know it all. And even though you actually do things. And for example, I've done 2,500 programs. I talk about these communication issues all the time. And the other day I was talking to this kid, and his mother happened to be a clinical psychologist. So I know why he said this, but he was 8 years old. And he looks at me and he says, and I wasn't looking at him for some reason, he says, Mr. Sanow, you should look me in the eye when you talk to me. And I'm thinking, okay, this is basic 101. Looking in the eye is something you should do. But here it is. We do this stuff over and over and over again. And you got to constantly be reminded and reinforced about these things because you forget to do that. And so when I say humility, it's really listening to everybody. I read so many different, I read the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. I look at so many different things all the time, and you got to constantly learn and realize you don't know it all. Because what happens, if you ever read the book Good to Great, it says good is the enemy of great. We become complacent with this. Yes. And this is where our downfall happens. So the key is humility. And then the other thing with that is to really understand where others are coming from. Everybody's different. We all have different worldviews. We all come from different angles. So, and that keeps your stress down a lot too, by the way, realizing when somebody totally says something that disagrees with you, but it keeps me strong that I listen to people, even though I totally maybe disagree with them, or they have a different style, but I can pick up from anybody there. So I'd say humility and then understand others before having them understand you would be the key.
Excellent. Arnold, this has been such a pleasure to have you as our guest on the show. Thank you so much for all of your leadership tips and incredible insights. Do you want to let our listeners know where they might be able to find you and follow up with you?
Yeah, and actually, if you want more information, I'm at just arnoldsanow.com, ARNOLDSANOW.com. You can email me at speaker@arnoldsanow.com. And by the way, if you email me and you've seen this broadcast, email me and just say I'd like a free electronic copy of your book. your get along book. And I'd be happy to send that if you, especially if you listen to Joni's broadcast right here. So just put in their book. I'd like a free copy, and I will email you right away one of those.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for that. That is such a great gift. Well, Arnold, thank you again. And thank you to all our listeners. And we'll look forward to seeing everyone on our next episode.
Thank you again. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. If you are interested in supporting this content, please hit the subscribe button. This will help to bring much needed funding to bring quality programming to our listeners like you. Your support is greatly appreciated. We encourage you to leave comments. If you have suggestions for leadership topics, please provide those in the comments and we will strive to address those in upcoming episodes. It is time to step into your power. The world needs your leadership. Together we are strong. Strong women, stronger world.